Hello everyone, my name is Maiwa Gidi and welcome to my second video. So in the first video we talked about the different geopolitical regions and the different blocks with the major ones and the minor ones. So I've decided that now we get to go into them one by one, starting with China, China, China. China is Africa's largest trading partner, and I told you in the last video that the trade volume between Africa and China is roughly around 300 billion USD. So, as at the year 2000, trade volume between Africa and China was just 10 billion USD. So you can see that in just 24 plus years, it has grown from that small amount of 10 billion USD to 300 billion USD. So you can see how rapid the the trade volume has grown between Africa and China. Just shows you how important they are to us in terms of our potential future. So all that trade, all that $300 billion trade, what is it on? So trade is usually a mixture of imports and exports. So as usual, Africa will mostly import um, finished goods from China like appliances, electronics, machinery, textiles, different finished products, while we export to them mostly agricultural products like cocoa, coffee, and oil, minerals, rare earth metals, and stuff like that. China has a decent amount of investments in a lot of rare earth mining operations on the continent. They are very, because they make a lot of semiconductor type materials, a lot of electronics. Rare earth metals are very important for building electronics and stuff like that. So Africa has a whole lot of rare earth metals, and China tries to get as much of it as they can. But the key thing I want to talk to us about today is not just the trade, but the investment that China has done on the continent. They are very, very big and in different and various dimensions. But I want to talk to you guys about the biggest ones that are currently either in development or are already done. So the first infrastructure I want to talk about today is the Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway. It cost around $3.8 billion and it was financed through Chinese loan to over 90%. The second one I want to talk about now is one I've actually been in, is the Nigeria's Abuja to Kaduna Railway. That one cost around 76 million US dollars and was financed through it was financed jointly between China and Nigeria, and China brought around 500 million loan to Nigeria, and Nigeria covered the rest of the expenses. So the third infrastructure project I want to talk about is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. This one was actually financed mainly strictly by Ethiopia. They used different methods to get the money, and it cost around $4.2 billion. It's one of the biggest, probably the biggest dam project in Africa at the moment. Either it's the biggest or it's the second biggest, one of the two. So it's supposed to generate around 6,000 megawatts of electricity for Ethiopia, just one single dam. That's how big that dam is. I think the whole Nigeria generation electricity generation is roughly around 5,000 megawatts. So you can see how much of an impact just that one single dam will cause for the Ethiopian economy in general. We've talked about the biggest projects. There are several other projects that are going on the continent. Several. All supported by China one way or the other. And the thing with the infrastructure drive is that Africa does currently have a huge infrastructure deficit. Africa has a kind of issue whereby the continent is massively big, but it does not. It's like the continent is one big island. It has a big, a lot of, it's a very big island and does not have a lot of rivers inside of it. So movement from one location to another is usually very, very difficult because of the vast expanse of land that you are supposed to navigate through to go from one point to another. So infrastructure is very important to us because infrastructure is what is going to facilitate intra-continental trade, which is trading between one African country and another African country. Currently, African countries trade more with the outside world than they trade with other African countries, which means a lot of the money that is supposed to be circulating within the continent goes out of the continent, which is extremely problematic. And this is one of the reasons why development in Africa is actually much more difficult than development in other places. In a lot of other societies, in Europe and China and in America, in ancient times and in previous times, trade was conducted via rivers and oceans and seas. Even up to today, most of the world's trade flows through the oceans, not through roads. Rails help too, but most of the world's trade flows through oceans and through rivers. So when your region does not have as much river, it becomes extremely costly to move goods from one location to another. That is Africa's problem. You need to build huge amounts of roads, huge amounts of railways, huge amounts of general infrastructure just to move goods from one point to another within the continent. So it becomes cost prohibitive to do those things. One of the things that I do hope as the years go by is that at some point, by the time a decent amount of the infrastructures are built, you will start to see a bigger pickup in trade between, especially within the continent, and that would end up improving generally the lives of the people around. So now let us talk about how the infrastructures that are being built will improve trade. They improve trade by improving the transportation networks. By the time the infrastructures are built, the roads, the railways, the different connecting points, like the different rail networks that are trying to connect Eastern Africa to Western Africa, and the road networks and all those things. By the time they are all built, goods can easily move from maybe like Nairobi, Kenya to Lagos, Nigeria, Eastern Africa to Western Africa. You can just go ride a big truck and just move goods from one point to another, or railway from different points to another. All those things will immediately start to improve trade between the different regions, thereby improving the standard of life for everybody. Also, with all the different energy infrastructure being built by China in on the continent, they would also help with, again, a lot of us in this part of the world cannot really boast of 24 hours electricity. We just can't. We don't have, a lot of us don't have 24 hours electricity. And you need electricity to improve your productivity. Electricity is very important for productivity. So the less electricity you have, the less productive. We all know it. Even us that work know how NEPA can just carry light now. Boom. You have to start looking for where you're going to get electricity from. And that's also another important thing about China. China is sort of taking over the solar revolution. They are building a whole lot of solar plants, and they are pretty much in charge of the solar electricity generation of the world right now. They own most of the companies that build cheap solar panels. So in the future, as Africa continues to import a lot of these solar panels and create sort of like a decentralized um, energy network where different people, different companies have their own power generation capacity, different homes have their own power generation capacity, it starts to improve the productivity, or it helps improve the productivity of the different people that are the different businesses, different companies on the continent. The third way that all these different projects that are being conducted by China improves trade in Africa is to support resource extraction. I was watching a video recently on, and one guy said in the video something very interesting. He says that Africa is very rich, but Africa is not liquid, aka Africa does not have money. We have a lot of resources, but we don't have liquid. We don't have cash. So you need to be able to have a decent amount of money to improve, to utilize the so-called potential we all like to say that Africa has, or the excessive amounts of resources that the continent has. You need investments, foreign direct investments, or investments of any kind to come in and bring out those resources and transport them in cost effective manners to where they would be used to for productive value and money generated from them. So the next importance of the trade that China does with Africa is it integrates Africa into the general Belt and Road Initiative. So let me do a brief summary of what the Belt and Road Initiative is, and later I would make a one single video on just the Belt and Road Initiative. So in ancient times, China was the center of global trade. So there was this particular road that led from China all the way to Europe. It was called the Silk Road. So it was the road facilitated trade between China and European countries. A lot of things were traded on that part, but they called it Silk Road because silk was probably the most valuable item goods that was being sold at the time, and a lot of Europeans wanted Chinese silk. So there was a whole lot of trade going on there. So in recent times, China decided that they were going to sort of rejuvenate the Silk Road and called it now the Belt and Road Initiative. The the difference now was that they decided to expand it to not just go from China to Europe, but go from China to most of the world. So it covers a decent amount of places in Asia, Europe, and Africa. It does have a line that goes directly to the African continent. So a lot of the infrastructure development that China is doing around the world, not just in Africa, is supposed to facilitate this Belt and is all under the umbrella of the Belt and Road Initiative, so as to improve trade between all the different regions and all the different countries on this new Silk Road. So by the time it's already showing a whole lot of impact in trade between different countries, and by the time it is done, it is going to be huge in integrating a lot of the world together as one single trade bloc. So Africa stands to benefit from this by being more connected to the rest of the world. We get to be able to move our goods through ports with Chinese funds, with Chinese resources, through Chinese companies to Europe, Asia, Australia. I'm not sure if Australia is currently part of the Belt and Road Initiative though. But it moves, the African goods can be moved more efficiently at cheaper cost to different parts of the world because of Chinese infrastructure investment. I've talked a lot about the goodness of the trade between Africa and China. Like I said, international geopolitics is a game, and it's usually about influence, one way or the other. Influence is usually the key thing countries like these major global powers think about when they are trying to interact with other countries, with each other, influence. So because of China's infrastructure development in Africa, China has gotten themselves a whole lot of influence on the continent. A whole lot of countries back China in a lot of issues now because of what China has helped them accomplish on their in their own countries. Western countries, mainly with their head as America, they mainly they have been trying for a long time now to criticize the Belt and Road Initiative and try to get countries to not participate in it. They use different excuses like debt trap diplomacy, like China is trying to put a decent amount of African countries into debt, into unsustainable debt, which is very strange because even as of today, most African countries owe their debts, most of their debts to Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank, and to the tune of around 35% of the debts of many of Africa as a whole. But Africa's debt to China is only around 12%. Whenever the Western countries scream, they scream about a few things. Number one, debt traps. Number two, trade imbalances. And number three, local industry concerns. They say that, oh, okay, China is going to use cheap goods to make African um, companies not competitive. But again, that does not even make any sense because cost of production in a lot of African countries, if things are done right, will be extremely low. We don't get paid that much money. Most Africans get paid very, very small amount of money if you convert it to dollar terms. So it is extremely unlikely that the Chinese companies will be able to outcompete the local companies if things are done properly. Then, as for the trade imbalances, yes, Africa does have a decent amount of trade imbalance with China. Most countries have trade imbalance with China. But the main thing about this particular issue is this. Right now, the trade is imbalanced. It is fine. But if African countries play their cards right, there's a good chance that in the future they could start to get to the level whereby they start to make more kinds of finished goods, more productive goods that even the Chinese will want to buy. I'll go more into that soon. But the the trade that we would prefer is more like more manufactured goods, even if it's low end manufacturing, small things like maybe like a toaster or a small things, just generally small things that can be in people's houses, and we produce them at cheaper rates than what the Chinese probably can do right now, which would make our goods more cost friendly to the rest of the world, which will make them want to buy them more. Another thing about the debt concerns too is this: it is the job of the representatives of the country to ensure that they seek for loans that actually do positively impact their economies. China does not know your country. It is your representatives that go there and say, okay, we want to build this particular infrastructure. So give us money to build this particular infrastructure. We believe that this infrastructure is going to be important to our economy. So it is not China that is going to come and do a feasibility analysis in your country to know what infrastructure you actually need. You're the one that goes to tell them what infrastructure you need, and they will be like, okay, this thing lines up with what we want to do, and then they help do it. So the next thing I want to talk about now is what are the geopolitical implications of Africa's relationship with China. Number one thing is that we are currently entering or already in a multipolar world. After World War II, America emerged as the undisputed superpower in the world because most of Europe had been beaten down, China was down, everybody was down. Only the USSR, even the USSR was down, but they still had a decent amount of power. But the US was like prime global power. So they got to do a lot of things as they liked because everybody needed them. But as time has gone on now, different countries have sort of gone back up. Europe is pretty economically solid. China now is pretty much neck and neck with America for GDP levels. Sure, they've surpassed America in purchasing power parity calculations for GDP, but America still leads in um, nominal GDP calculations. Because of that, China now has a decent amount of influence in the world too. So the world has gotten to a point whereby there are different influences now trying to vie for political and socioeconomic clout. I'll use the word clout. So we on the continent need to understand that there are different players in the game now too. And the good thing about having options is that you get to make both sides do what is better for your interest. Because let's give an example now. Nigeria wants to make a new port now in one city, and they try to go to the Americans, and the Americans tell them that no, you must do this, and that. And before we give you those particular loans, the Nigeria can just simply say, okay, let us go to China now and see what we can get for them. The China will then offer them better negotiations for access to that particular resource or that particular infrastructure. Then America now be like, maybe us too, we can offer more to these people now to be the ones to have access to this particular infrastructure, or to they have the ability to build this particular infrastructure. So us being able to negotiate with different blocks helps us, gives us more power to be able to dictate for us what is better for us. And this is why I am very big on making sure that smart people negotiate for us. If your leadership is poor, they will not understand what they need to do to get the best for themselves and for you as an individual and for your country. So you need to ensure that the people that are negotiating for you are your possible best people, because these people are not doing these things for your interest. A lot of the ports and a lot of the infrastructure that China built, they have percentages of those ports. They aim to recoup their money back. They are not just building these things out of the kindness of their heart. They aim to recoup their money back. So it is also in your own interest to ensure that you are also looking out for your interest. And if you are talking with smart people, negotiating with smart people, you should also have smart people negotiating for you. Another thing that we should ensure that we do a lot on the continent, especially right now, is to seek technology transfer. What is technology transfer? So when a lot of Western countries, when China was still down, when they were still poor in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, whenever Western countries wanted to tap into the huge Chinese population market, because China has a very huge advantage when it comes to population. There are 1.4 billion people. So whenever Western countries wanted to take advantage of the Chinese market, the Chinese were like, no, you cannot take advantage of our market without giving us things in return. So what did they do? They told the Western countries to ensure that their companies build factories that produce those goods in China, They then also told them that they should ensure that they form joint partnerships with Chinese companies to build those things. So let us use an example of Volkswagen. Now. Volkswagen is a German company. So when Volkswagen now wants to build a plant in China now, it's not just Volkswagen going to China to build a plant. What China does is that China tells Volkswagen to partner with a Chinese company to build that plant so that it now becomes a joint venture between a Chinese company and the German company. The German company has the know-how, and the Chinese company is there to learn how to do these things, how to build these cars. And that was what China did when and in the 1980s, 1970s, and now they have BYD, they have a whole lot of car companies that are doing all manner of crazy things around the world, especially in the electric vehicle industry. Because of the ensured that the Europeans gave them the technology that they were going to use to in those factories. They taught the people, the Chinese people, how to build those things too. And now, because of that, China has competition to almost every Western product, from phones to ships to cars to and even industry itself that the Western countries are not very strong at now. China is very strong in them too, like the solar industry, many renewable technology. Most of them are developed in China. Electric vehicles now, all those things now are being dominated by China simply because they let or they forced the Western companies that wanted to take advantage of their market to do technology transfer. So we Africans too need to settle down and start to make these countries, including China too, not just Western countries, China too, to do technology transfer with us. Teach the people, form joint partnerships with the local companies and teach them how to build this product so that eventually new companies will arise from the knowledge that has been gained from those um, joint partnerships. And in the future, we will start to see global companies being made in Africa on a very, very large scale. Another thing I want to talk about with regards the geopolitical implications of the China-Africa partnership and the general multipolarity of the world is influence on African countries' policies and African countries' governance. So China has a system or an ideology of non-interference in the country's internal affairs, which is different from what the West does. But that's why a lot of African countries like to trade with China because they don't get lectured on whatever kinds of things Westerners like to lecture people about. So we can take advantage of this of that too by ensuring that we stand our ground. It's the same way playing both sides. If they come and say, okay, no, this particular policy that you are doing is not good, because a lot of this time it's not that it's not good, it's just that it does not favor them. Like them trying to push renewable or African countries not using coal for development. They used coal. A lot of the world, coal is the cheapest form of electricity generation. A lot of these countries use coal to get to the point that they are in and still use coal till today because it's very easy to generate electricity from coal and it's very cheap and very cost effective. If your energy is expensive, then your goods are expensive, which makes them less competitive. But these people will now come and start telling you that no, that coal is bad for the environment. And you're like, we didn't destroy the environment. If you look at the current global emissions, it's Western countries and China that are the head of Africans don't destroy the environment. We don't have enough productivity to destroy the environment. So you cannot now be telling us that we should go for expensive electricity over cheap electricity. It doesn't make any sense. We will not be competitive. So you need to ensure that you understand what is best in your own interest before you start parroting foreign narratives. Yes, climate change is a problem for the world, but we didn't cause it. It is not us that is meant to fix it. It's them. It's the people that cause the issue that are meant to fix the issue. You cannot say that we should not use cheap electricity and and go and start try to find out where you're going to get expensive renewable electricity for. Those things are not for us. So when these countries try to influence your decision making because they feel like, oh, okay, they are the only ones that you can turn to. Now, that is not the case. You can turn to China. And if China is trying to stress your life, you turn to the US. If the US stresses, you turn to Europe. There are different areas now that you can turn to ensure that you get the best deal for you. Don't take deals that are not in your interest because you are trying to feel like, oh, you are maybe, let me use the word woke, or you want to be Western, that kind of thing. In my conclusion, I would like us to think about the future. This current China Africa relationship has huge potential to diversify Africa's export in a whole lot of ways. If we play our cards right, we can go from just being a resource extracting region to a region that goes up the value chain from probably like low end manufacturing goods to medium end manufacturing goods to high end manufacturing goods through the use of technology transfer and setting up proper companies and taking advantage of China's infrastructure push in Africa. We would settle down and build ourselves up slowly but surely until we get to the economic level we are trying to. Like I said again, we because of the different interests vying for us, we can negotiate better terms for ourselves. And we should ensure that smart people negotiate for us so that they can ensure that they have our best interest at heart. We should also do our best to balance out our relationships, not just follow one group, but ensure that we have a a decently good relationship with the different groups. Not being a flip flopper, because if a country is seen as sort of like a flip flopper, nobody will trust you. But if you have your values, your methodology, and everybody understands, okay, this is how these people are, it makes it easier. Even if they do not agree with you, they can at least tie you down to one spot and then know how better to deal with you. So we should do our best to balance out our relationships with all sides so that we can get the best value for us. I hope this video was not too long. And if you have gained some things from this video, I hope that you like and share and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully we make many more videos like this in the future. Thank you very much.